What does it take to transform the soul of a nation? For one man, it took courage, conviction, and an unyielding faith in justice. Today, we're delving into the remarkable life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a minister, orator, and leader who became the voice of a movement that reshaped America. From the streets of Montgomery to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, King's journey is one of profound impact and enduring inspiration. In this video, we'll explore King's upbringing in the segregated South, his rise as a leader during a tumultuous time in American history, the struggles and triumphs of his fight for civil rights, and the legacy he left behind for future generations. The Jim Crow laws, rooted in the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson decision, institutionalized segregation and discrimination across the South, ensuring a rigid racial hierarchy. Public facilities designated for Black Americans, from schools to transportation, were underfunded and poorly maintained, a stark contrast to their white counterparts. This inequality extended to nearly every facet of life, creating systemic barriers that denied African Americans opportunities for education, healthcare, and basic dignity. The so-called separate but equal doctrine was a cruel lie, with equality nowhere in sight. This era of legalized oppression was enforced not just through laws, but through violence and terror. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan wielded fear as a weapon, targeting Black individuals and communities with lynchings, arson, and other acts of brutality. These horrors were intended to reinforce racial subjugation and silence those who dared to challenge the status quo. At the same time, Black Americans were systematically disenfranchised through poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright intimidation, stripping them of political power and voice. Economically, the situation was equally grim. Most Black families in the South were confined to low-paying, menial jobs, or trapped in the exploitative system of sharecropping, which kept them in a cycle of poverty and debt. Economic mobility was stifled by discriminatory practices that denied access to fair wages, property ownership, and financial independence. Despite these hardships, Black communities demonstrated remarkable resilience, establishing their own businesses, schools, and cultural institutions that became havens of support and pride. Amidst this oppressive backdrop, seeds of resistance began to take root. Organizations like the NAACP challenged systemic injustice through legal battles, public campaigns, and grassroots organizing. Meanwhile, the Great Migration saw millions of African Americans leave the South for cities in the North and West, reshaping the nation's demographics and fostering cultural movements like the Harlem Renaissance. These shifts not only created new opportunities, but also laid the foundation for the civil rights movement that Martin Luther King Jr. would later lead with such profound impact. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia, into a lineage of faith and leadership. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., known as Daddy King, was a fiery preacher who served as pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, a position previously held by Martin's maternal grandfather. King's mother, Alberta Williams King, was a teacher and graduate of Spelman College, whose quiet strength and encouragement fostered his intellectual curiosity. Together, his parents instilled in him a deep sense of faith, justice, and the belief that education was a path to empowerment. Atlanta in the 1930s was a city divided by the harsh realities of segregation. Black residents faced systemic racism at every turn, from restricted access to public facilities to exclusion from political participation. Yet within these confines, vibrant Black communities thrived, demonstrating remarkable resilience and ingenuity. The King family lived on Auburn Avenue, in the heart of the Sweet Auburn district, which was a hub of Black business and culture. Known as one of the wealthiest Black neighborhoods in America at the time, Sweet Auburn was home to successful businesses, schools, and churches that embodied the strength and ambition of Atlanta's Black middle class. The community around Auburn Avenue was deeply rooted in the values of faith, education, and self-determination. Churches like Ebenezer Baptist were not only places of worship, but also centers for social support and activism, helping Black families navigate the challenges of segregation. Educational institutions in Atlanta's Black community, including the prestigious Atlanta University Center, inspired generations of leaders and intellectuals, instilling hope for a better future. Growing up in this environment, young Martin was surrounded by role models who exemplified resilience and resistance. He witnessed his father's outspoken activism against racial injustice and absorbed his mother's quiet but firm guidance. The King's home on Auburn Avenue was a place of reflection and activity, filled with discussions about faith, equality, and the power of community. These early experiences shaped Martin's worldview, planting the seeds for the transformative leader he would become. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up in a home where faith and justice were central pillars, thanks to the profound influence of his parents. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., or Daddy King, was a fiery preacher at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. Known for his bold and impassioned sermons, Daddy King used his pulpit to address the injustices of segregation and encourage his congregation to fight for their rights. Beyond his role in the church, he modeled integrity and courage by actively challenging racial inequality in the community, such as boycotting businesses that discriminated against black customers. This unwavering commitment to justice left an indelible mark on his son, teaching young Martin the power of speaking truth to power. Alberta Williams King, Martin's mother, brought a quieter yet equally transformative influence into his life. A Spelman College graduate and teacher, Alberta emphasized the importance of education and intellectual curiosity. She nurtured Martin's early love of learning, fostering his ability to think critically and engage with complex ideas. Her calm strength provided emotional stability and a sense of dignity, instilling in him a belief in his own worth and potential despite the systemic racism that surrounded their community. Alberta's role as a loving guide balanced the fiery activism of Daddy King, creating a supportive environment where young Martin could thrive. Martin's precociousness became evident early on. Encouraged by his parents' unwavering support, he excelled in school, skipping both the 9th and 12th grades and enrolling at Morehouse College at the age of 15. This remarkable achievement was a testament to his intellectual gifts and the strong educational foundation his mother had helped build. At Morehouse, Martin was exposed to new ideas and perspectives that expanded his understanding of the world, particularly in the areas of philosophy, theology, and social justice. A key figure in Martin's development during his time at Morehouse was Dr. Benjamin Mays, a theologian, educator, and civil rights advocate. Mays, who served as president of the college, became a mentor and inspiration to the young King. Through his lectures and personal interactions, Mays encouraged Martin to see ministry not only as a spiritual calling, but as a powerful platform for societal change. He challenged Martin to grapple with moral and ethical questions about justice and inequality, shaping the intellectual and philosophical framework that would underpin his later leadership in the civil rights movement. The combination of his father's activism, his mother's intellectual and emotional guidance, and the mentorship of Dr. Movement, Mays gave Martin a unique foundation for his future. These influences cultivated in him a deep sense of faith, justice, and responsibility, setting the stage for his emergence as one of history's most transformative leaders. But King's path was not without pain. At age 6, he experienced his first direct encounter with racism when a white friend's parents forbade them from playing together. The sting of that moment stayed with him, fueling a lifelong determination to confront the injustice he had witnessed. Martin Luther King Jr.'s first major role in the civil rights movement began in December 1955, when he was chosen to lead the Montgomery Bus Boycott, a pivotal campaign that would reshape the fight against segregation. The boycott was sparked by the arrest of Rosa Parks, a seamstress and seasoned activist who refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Parks' act of defiance, though seemingly simple, was the result of years of frustration and strategic planning within the local civil rights community. Her arrest galvanized Montgomery's black residents, who organized a mass protest against the city's discriminatory transportation system. At the time, King was a young pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, relatively unknown outside Montgomery. His eloquence, moral conviction, and ability to inspire unity made him a natural choice to lead the newly formed Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA, which coordinated the boycott. King quickly embraced the philosophy of nonviolent resistance, drawing on the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and Christian principles to frame the boycott as a moral struggle for justice and human dignity. His leadership was characterized by a commitment to peaceful protest, even in the face of hostility and violence, The boycott began on December 5, 1955, and lasted for an extraordinary 381 days. During this time, the black community of Montgomery, which made up the majority of the bus ridership, refused to use the buses. Instead, they organized carpools, walked to work, and found other ways to navigate their daily lives without public transportation. The collective action and solidarity of the community were remarkable, as they persevered through hardships, including job losses, harassment, and arrests. King himself faced immense challenges during the boycott. His home was bombed, and he was arrested on trumped-up charges, yet he remained steadfast in his commitment to nonviolence. His speeches during the boycott captured the attention of national audiences, framing the struggle as part of a broader moral battle against injustice. His calm, resolute demeanor and powerful oratory not only inspired the participants in Montgomery, but also drew widespread support from across the country. The boycott ended in victory on December 20, 1956, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. This legal triumph was a watershed moment in the civil rights movement, demonstrating the power of collective action and the effectiveness of nonviolent resistance. More than a year of sacrifice and determination by Montgomery's black residents had not only desegregated public transportation in the city, but also catapulted Martin Luther King Jr. onto the national stage as a leader of the civil rights movement. This campaign set the tone for the years of activism that would follow, solidifying King's role as a transformative figure in the fight for racial equality. Martin Luther King Jr. His leadership reached its zenith on August 28, 1963, during the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This monumental event brought together more than 250,000 people from diverse racial, economic, and religious backgrounds, all converging on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., to demand civil rights and economic justice. Organized by a coalition of civil rights, labor, and religious groups, the march called for an end to racial segregation, equal access to employment, voting rights protections, and the passage of meaningful civil rights legislation. The sheer scale and unity of the demonstration marked it as a turning point in the civil rights movement. King's role in the march was pivotal. By 1963, he was already a prominent figure in the movement, recognized for his philosophy of nonviolent resistance and his ability to mobilize people toward a common cause. As the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, King had helped organize significant campaigns, but the March on Washington placed him squarely in the national spotlight as the movement's moral and strategic leader. King was chosen to deliver the closing speech, a position of great significance, as his words would serve to encapsulate the goals and spirit of the march. The speech King delivered that day, known as the "I Have a Dream" speech, remains one of the most iconic orations in history. Standing before the Lincoln Memorial, King spoke of a future where the promises of equality and freedom, articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, would be fully realized. His words combined eloquent moral clarity with profound hope, as he described his dream of a nation where people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Drawing from biblical references, historical ideals, and his own vision of justice, King's address struck a powerful chord, capturing both the urgency of the moment and the enduring aspirations of the movement. The impact of King's speech was immediate and far-reaching. It electrified the crowd, resonating deeply with those who attended, and millions more who watched or listened via television and radio. The speech and the march itself helped galvanize public and political support for civil rights legislation, paving the way for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. King's words also cemented his legacy as a global symbol of justice and human rights, inspiring movements for equality not only in the United States but around the world. The March on Washington and King's "I Have a Dream" speech represented the height of the nonviolent civil rights movement, showcasing the power of collective action and moral leadership. It was a moment that crystallized the struggle for equality into a vision of hope and possibility, placing King at the heart of America's moral reckoning and leaving an indelible mark on history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s path as a leader of the civil rights movement was fraught with danger, yet his unwavering courage and commitment to nonviolence defined his extraordinary journey. From physical attacks to relentless threats against his life, King faced adversity with a steadfast resolve that inspired millions. In 1956, during the Montgomery Bus Boycott, King's home was bombed in retaliation for his leadership in the movement. His wife, Coretta Scott King, and their infant daughter were inside but escaped unharmed. When an angry crowd gathered outside his home seeking retribution, King calmed them with a call for peace, urging them to respond with love rather than violence. This response became emblematic of King's leadership, even in moments of personal danger. King's life was further endangered in 1958 when he was nearly killed during a book signing in Harlem. A woman stabbed him in the chest with a letter opener, and doctors later revealed that the blade was so close to his aorta that any sudden movement could have been fatal. After surviving the attack, King publicly forgave his assailant, demonstrating his profound commitment to forgiveness and the principles of nonviolence. In addition to physical violence, King faced over 20 arrests throughout his career, often on baseless charges designed to undermine his activism. These arrests were not only personal trials, but also opportunities for him to highlight the injustices of the legal system. His imprisonment in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 resulted in one of his most significant contributions to the movement, the Letter from Birmingham Jail. This powerful text defended civil disobedience and articulated the moral urgency of confronting injustice, solidifying King's reputation as both a leader and a philosopher of justice. Threats to King's life were constant, often targeting his family as well. Despite the psychological toll, he refused to let fear deter him from his mission. King frequently acknowledged the risks he faced, once stating, "If I stopped to answer all the threats, I would have no time for my work." His resilience under such pressure exemplified his unshakable faith and inspired others in the movement to remain steadfast in the face of danger. Through it all, King's commitment to nonviolence remained unyielding. Inspired by Mahatma Gandhi and his Christian faith, he believed that responding to hatred with love was the only way to break the cycle of violence and achieve meaningful, lasting change. His ability to endure brutality while maintaining his principles cemented his role as a moral leader, whose courage and compassion continue to resonate to this day. In 1965, the Selma to Montgomery marches became a defining moment in the civil rights movement, illustrating both the brutality of systemic racism and the power of nonviolent resistance to effect change. Organized to highlight the disenfranchisement of Black voters in the South, the marches were a direct response to the widespread use of literacy tests, poll taxes, and intimidation tactics that denied African Americans their constitutional right to vote. Selma, Alabama, where fewer than 2% of eligible Black residents were registered to vote, became the focal point of this struggle. The first of the marches, later known as Bloody Sunday, took place on March 7, 1965. Approximately 600 peaceful demonstrators began their march from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery, but they were brutally attacked by Alabama state troopers and local law enforcement as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Armed with tear gas, clubs, and whips, the officers unleashed a violent assault that left many marchers injured. The horrifying images of unarmed protesters being beaten and trampled were broadcast on national television, shocking the conscience of the nation and drawing widespread condemnation. Martin Luther King Jr., who was in Atlanta at the time of the first march, quickly mobilized to join the movement in Selma. Recognizing the power of media to sway public opinion and pressure lawmakers, King called on clergy, activists, and supporters from across the country to participate in a second march. On March 9th, King led the group to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but rather than proceed, he stopped, prayed, and turned the marchers back. This strategic decision, often called Turnaround Tuesday, was made to avoid further violence while awaiting federal court protection for a larger demonstration. The final march began on March 21, 1965, with federal approval and protection from the National Guard. Over 3,000 marchers set out from Selma, and their numbers swelled to 25,000 by the time they reached Montgomery on March 25th. King's speech at the Alabama state capitol, delivered at the conclusion of the march, resonated deeply. How long? Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. His words captured the determination and hope of the movement while underscoring the moral urgency of their cause. The Selma to Montgomery marches galvanized support for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law on August 6. The act outlawed discriminatory practices that had disenfranchised Black voters, marking a monumental victory for the civil rights movement. The marches also demonstrated King's strategic brilliance in using media and moral authority to rally public support and effect legislative change, solidifying his legacy as a masterful leader in the fight for justice and equality. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership in the civil rights movement led to groundbreaking legislative achievements that reshaped American society. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was one of the most significant victories of the movement, outlawing segregation in public spaces and prohibiting discrimination in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This legislation dismantled the legal foundations of Jim Crow and was a monumental step toward racial equality. King's leadership in campaigns like the Birmingham movement and his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech during the March on Washington were instrumental in building the national momentum that led to the act's passage. His ability to frame civil rights as a moral issue compelled the nation to confront its conscience. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was another transformative milestone, addressing the systemic disenfranchisement of black voters in the South. The act eliminated discriminatory practices such as literacy tests and poll taxes, while granting federal oversight of voter registration in areas with a history of suppression. The Selma to Montgomery marches, led in part by King, played a pivotal role in galvanizing public and political support for the act. Televised images of police brutality against peaceful demonstrators highlighted the urgency of voting rights, and King's leadership brought national attention to this fundamental issue of democracy. Beyond civil rights, King broadened his vision to address systemic poverty, recognizing its deep connection to racial injustice. In 1967, he launched the Poor People's Campaign, advocating for economic justice, fair wages, and access to basic necessities for all Americans, regardless of race. King argued that true equality required addressing economic inequality, which disproportionately affected African Americans and other marginalized groups. This initiative highlighted his growing focus on economic empowerment as a cornerstone of social justice. King also became a vocal critic of the Vietnam War, extending his advocacy to issues of global justice. In his powerful 1967 speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, he condemned the war as morally indefensible and criticized the U.S. government for prioritizing military conflict over addressing poverty and inequality at home. King's anti-war stance reflected his belief in the interconnectedness of injustice, as he linked militarism, racism, and economic exploitation as systemic evils that needed to be confronted together. Though controversial, his opposition to the war demonstrated his commitment to justice on a global scale. Dr. King's work transcended the boundaries of civil rights, evolving into a broader fight for human dignity and equality worldwide. By addressing issues like economic injustice and global peace, he expanded the movement's scope, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire efforts toward a more just and equitable world. Today, King's legacy is celebrated worldwide. His birthday is honored as a national holiday in the United States, and his words continue to inspire movements for justice and equality. Yet his dream of a truly equitable society remains unfinished, challenging each generation to take up the mantle. Dr. King once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." His life reminds us that bending that arc requires courage, perseverance, and faith. What will you do to continue his work? One way to continue Dr. King's work is by supporting organizations like Race Forward, a national nonprofit committed to advancing equity and dismantling systemic racism. Founded in 1981, Race Forward develops innovative strategies to drive change in policies, institutions, and cultural narratives. The organization works across sectors, from education to healthcare to criminal justice, ensuring that racial equity becomes a reality in communities nationwide. By focusing on systemic solutions, Race Forward honors the legacy of Dr. King by addressing the root causes of inequality and building a more just and inclusive society. Race Forward's impact is far-reaching, from providing racial equity training for leaders and institutions to producing insightful research and reports that inform transformative action. Their work includes projects like the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, GARE, a network of governments working collaboratively to achieve racial equity, and Color Lines, a daily news site that highlights stories on race and justice. These efforts empower individuals and communities to take meaningful action, helping to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. To learn more about Race Forward and how you can support their mission, check out the video description for details on how to contribute. Together, we can carry forward Dr. King's vision of equality and justice for all. Check the description for more resources on Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this story inspiring, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Next time, we'll explore the life of Malcolm X, a fiery orator and influential leader whose journey from hardship to activism reshaped the fight for Black empowerment. Don't miss it.